All right, welcome everyone. Get started here, and yeah, thank you all for coming. It's I'm actually excited for this session too to hear what we're going to talk about. And I think this is a topic of open open hardware and open software. It's an in-depth discussion is long overdue. You're going to hear from some great panelists today. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce who we've got here today. So my name is Brad White. I'm a automation and energy efficiency consultant from Vancouver in Canada. And with me today, we've got on the end there, Kelvin Slater. Kelvin spent 8 years in the building automation control industry, and he's very interested in embedded hardware as well as open source building automation and software frameworks. Next to me here, we've got Zach Netsov, and he's a product specialist at Contemporary Controls. And he's focused on the BAS automation line of products, which provides solutions for both small and scalable building management utilizing open source Sedona framework. And his background is from DeVry University with a concentration in renewable energy. And yeah, he's part of the team at Contemporary Controls that championed the design creation of the BAS Pi product, which some of you may have seen out on the floor, but it's a Raspberry Pi based controller. And he also runs a monthly technical blog. And lastly, in the middle there, all the way from Sweden, we have Nicholas Verne, and who also goes by the Building Whisperer, and he's the CEO of Go IoT. And he's made it a lifelong mission of getting buildings to talk to people. And so we're very fortunate to have the Nordic perspective represented here as well. And so, obviously all of us here are kind of on the side of being very, very much proponents of opening up hardware and software. Obviously, that's not entirely a universal feeling in the industry, and so I hope that's part of the dialogue that we can have today. So this is not just us passing information to you, but we're hoping that we can actually have a good discussion and dialogue about this. So I'm going to ask each of these gentlemen to come up and kind of give you briefly their perspective on why they're excited about open hardware and open software and how they're already using it in their work. And then after that, let's I think open it up to a discussion. And I guess I'll just ask if anyone does have questions, just please come up to the mic here and ask it so the whole room can hear. And so without further ado, maybe I'll ask Kelvin if you wouldn't mind going first.
Yep.
Good morning. My name's Kelvin Slater, and I'm just a controls contractor. I don't own any businesses or I don't manufacture any products. What I do have is, over the 8 years that I've been in the controls industry, I've had a lot of exposure to a lot of different products from various manufacturers, and I've looked into them a great deal, like what the controllers are made out of, what parts they consist of, the software that goes into them. Not really, on any professional level, but just kind of like a DIY interest, like, oh, what are in these things? And what we're talking about today is, we've gotten to the point where this right here is a personal computer. It's an entire Linux PC. Just this part right here is an entire Linux PC on a single chip. So is this one right here. This one, I believe, has Android. So, you have a personal computer. It's got open source operating system, and your control engines, your DDC, kind of runs like an application that you would download from, like you would download something for your laptop computer. It's almost to that point. We're almost to the point where we're putting small personal computers in air conditioning units, electric meters, and all that's really neat is you have your PC, and then you bring it onto a baseboard that has all your heavy duty connectors, and you have yourself a controller. And it's pretty much open source. You could actually almost make your own controller if you wanted to. We have some items that are sort of in that vein today that we can talk about later on. Nicholas?
Yeah, sure.
All right.
Yeah, hello. My name is Nicholas Vern. I'm from Sweden, and I'm super jet lagged. I only slept like 7 hours the last 3 days. Been working in the industry not so long. We have 500 buildings that use our cloud software and open hardware in the Nordics. And what we've seen, I mean, we started with power line communication back in the day, and we moved on from there. And I think we saw the need with system integrators. There's so many different buildings because every building that you go into is basically unique, and you have different controllers from different manufacturers, and it's not easy to get data out. So we just wanted to create something in an open way. So you have a building, and then you say, okay, I need this, this, and this. You do that with the hardware, and then maybe you want to see something with the software from this part, or you want to write your own applications, and that's what you should be able to do. And then also put whatever data that you want in whatever cloud that you want. I think I got the prompt from Brad. I mean, why are we doing this? Is it because it's fun? Yeah, sometimes. Is it because, I mean, I think it's 45% of the buildings today, I mean, that represents the total energy consumption in the world, right? And we need to sort of democratize the speed of innovation working with buildings. And right now, even in the Nordics or in Europe or whatever, it's so locked in some way, shapes, or forms. And there's so much stuff that we can do. I mean, if you look at the stuff that Kelvin showed, it's just like these small stuff that is, I mean, take the power, take you to the moon. There's so much that can be done, and we need to make it faster. So I think it's not only about open hardware, open software, but also like opening up the business and opening up our minds to try to do these things. And that's something that we have to do together. Because the technology is there, it's just us that need to come together and make this happen. So it's going to be super interesting to, I mean, hear questions and to hear what these guys are going to say as well. So thank you so much.
Hello, my name is Zach. I'm a product specialist at Contemporary Controls. Our business model is based on using open technologies in our products. We started by using open standards such as BACnet. We've used some open source technologies such as Sedona for control. We're looking into Haystack and other things like that. And more recently, we've developed platforms on the Raspberry Pi using open source hardware. We don't believe in proprietary or restrictive manner of making products, and we believe that open can provide more interoperability between all these controllers and devices that we have out there. And there's many benefits to open, and the word open we're kind of referring to as open standard or open source, but at the end of the day, there's a little bit of overlap in the benefits there. So that's kind of where we come from.
I mean, we're happy to kind of take questions or comments from the audience, but I'll maybe start off and kind of pick up on what Zach was talking about there at the end. And, what do we actually mean by open? And maybe I'll ask a question to you guys. Can something be both proprietary and open? Is that an oxymoron, or is that something that exists, or does open have to be open source? I
could try to answer. I mean, I think it's in the base might be open. Let's say you have a building, then you open it up for others to innovate on. But those in turn can create proprietary solutions which add to the value of the building. So it doesn't necessarily mean like everything has to be open source or whatever. But I think like the question, we talked about that. I mean, like has anyone here used like any open software? Raise your hands. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, so if any of you have used Google, I mean, Google is partly run on open source software. So yeah. I think part of the point here is saying that open source is not actually that radical an idea, and we use it all day, every day in the IT world. Although it may be a little more radical for the building automation industry, but the fact that secure products, I think, can be built on open. I think maybe that's another thing to address is a concern. Cybersecurity is obviously a big concern. And do you see vulnerabilities in going to more open platforms? Does that create additional security risk?
I'd like to make a comment on
Kelvin,
that.
please.
when you talk about open software, sometimes you may be led to believe that if you have open source code that you have more vulnerabilities because people can examine the code and they can find ways to take advantage of your systems. But I've seen that's not the case. Like open source operating systems, such as the Debian operating system that's running on this device, is maintained by a very large community of people, and they're able to detect. They look at the code, they find vulnerabilities, they report them, and they usually address them a lot faster than a smaller group of developers could, because the code for this operating system is being looked at by the entire world, and it's available to everybody. So when you have these open systems, you actually have the opportunity for a lot greater security, and also most importantly maintainability. When you have an operating system such as Debian, Android, you have the ability to update the underlying, sometimes it's referred to as a platform on these controllers, not so much like the DDC application, but the underlying software that allows the base system to operate. And it also gives you kind of like a two different areas for things for people to work on. You have kind of the HVAC technicians can work on the user space applications, and you can have somebody that's more of a traditional IT person maintain the operating system, and it's an environment that they'll be familiar with because it's exactly like any Linux or Android operating system.
Yeah, something to add here is a good example of this is, for example, Debian 10 will have something called Secure Boot. So that's a great enhancement in security that's coming from an open source community.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess, you're in the business of making open source products. I mean, security's got to be a huge concern. I mean, is it, how do you address that? And
I mean, usually, like you mentioned, proprietary and open is not really an oxymoron, because you can take an open technology and improve it as long as you're not kind of disabling its interoperability with other things. And things that come from open source communities are very powerful.
One of the thing about open systems is everybody's saying they're open system. I'm trying to figure out what is an open system? I know what it is, but when I'm in front of a non-technical client, and I'm trying to explain to them, they say, well, this guy's open too, he told me, this guy's open. So how do you demonstrate, or how can we differentiate what a real open system is? Because I've not seen an open system yet on the market in the major player.
Yeah.
There is no open system that's a major player right now.
Yeah.
Actually, what I've seen is that Niagara helped, and there was a big push, and they were getting more and more open. And in the past couple of years, they figured out, you know what, I'm actually going to make less money here. So they're going in the other direction. If we're being truthful, that's what's going on. I'm not going to name any manufacturer, but they're going in the other direction now, but they're still saying they're open.
Yeah.
So I want to know, what is an open system? I know what it is.
Yeah.
How do you demonstrate to a non-technical person this is open?
Yeah, I think.
If I can interject his statement or question to add on to that, because he was going, it ties in exactly to what he's saying. The trend in the marketplace is obviously exactly what you just did. You showed the easy integration of a smart chip or device within the components of the system. So there's no longer the need for an external aftermarket controls, hardware, sensors, wiring, the whole 9 yards, programming for that matter. It's simple as setting up your home router. You plug it in, it comes on, it recognizes itself, and it adjusts to your network. Along the lines of what he just said, obviously these big OEMs, and I'm not here to step on any toes either, but obviously we know that the OEMs have an incentive to produce equipment with integrated smarts, which is obviously going to corner back the market towards a more proprietary system. I'm trying to get an idea from you guys. Do you represent some form of the industry that that is speaking with these manufacturers and OEMs to introduce truly universal components and languages and protocols into their devices so that anyone is potentially integrated with that equipment, or are you guys just the one-offs like the Linux or the Mozilla Firefoxes of Control?
I do. Because I'm a controls contractor, I buy the controls, and actually that's why I come to AHR. As I come and I talk to a lot of, if you go down to the controls section, a lot of the people who actually develop the products from the big companies are there today, and they're available. And they really actually have listened to a lot of input, and to your original question, what is open? It depends on how far you want to go. I mean, at this point, this is an ARM processor on here. To build this processor, you have to pay a license, but they're actually going to open instruction set architecture such as RISC-V, which is open source hardware designed for a chip. So it's like if you wanted to make your own silicon processor, there's actually people out there who have an open source architecture where they'll give you a design and you can make your own chips if you want to go that far. I mean, we're not talking about that, I don't think. I think the main thing that you can get with these type of products is a greater level of interoperability between vendors. On a lot of sites these days, I'm seeing a lot of different products come from different companies. And I think the biggest advantage of having software that's more interoperable is the advantage, because sometimes you have these sites and they use protocols and application frameworks that aren't compatible with each other, so you can't see what somebody else's controller is doing from the front end. I think that's probably one of the biggest disadvantage with like you were talking about one product. It started off as like, oh, you can put it anywhere, and that was Niagara is great for that, because there are a lot of vendors that are putting like Niagara framework on their controllers. So we'd like to see it move further in that direction, where you can see, the logic that's in different controllers from different manufacturers, because inevitably all these sites, there's multiple vendors on the site. So I'd like to see all the stuff work together a lot better visibility into other people's systems.
Well, and one thing, and this kind of plays actually, Nicholas and I were having a discussion over lunch, and one of the things that kind of came up is the need to separate the hardware from the software, and that right now for most manufacturers, those two things are very closely tied together. You can't just program, you're not using any old software to program a tritium device or a Delta device, or I don't want to name names or pick on anyone because it's almost universal in the industry. But yeah, you're using that manufacturer's software, and I think one of the keys is to move to where the software and the hardware are not so tied together. So maybe Nicholas, can you just kind of pick up on that? Maybe talk about your approach to open, because your stuff is not open source. It's not necessarily the stuff that Kelvin was talking about.
Yeah,
it's truly open source, but it's open in a very real sense as well.
Yeah. I think I really would like to know if you know the definition of open system. I would love to hear it, because I think there is all the people in this room have their own definition of how open something should be. And I think Brad, you mentioned it yesterday when you got sort of the same question. Don't talk about it. The first rule of open, don't talk about open. Don't talk about the technology. I mean, what do you want to do? What are your problems today? I mean, again, that you have to shift that, because there's so much buzz today about AI, machine learning, open systems, whatever. Where do you want to be? I think that's been my journey the last year, talking a lot about technology with customers and back in web services, or we're going to do AI, machine learning, and advanced analytics, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't help. Or customers come to us and say, okay, we want to do something with IoT. Okay, what do you want to do? We have no idea. Or we go to customers and say, you can do anything you want, it's open. Okay, we don't know what we want to do. Right. We don't know either. So it's just figuring out, okay, where are you today? What do you want to do? Can open systems maybe do this in an easier way, more cost effective? Is it going to make it more interoperable? Is it going to make it better? Is it going to make it work? I think that's where you need to talk about these things. So open hardware, open software, it's huge opportunities for the entire industry to move to a much, much more control where it needs to be. But I mean, it's not going to happen if we go down to nitty-gritty and talk about all this kind of stuff. It has to happen on a higher level, and the why perspective has to be there. And then, of course, comes the knowledge. And I think, okay, in the US, there's a knowledge gap with these, traditional BS technicians, etc. But I mean, that knowledge, I'm going to talk to Ken about it for a lot of times. It's not that, okay, maybe the job is going to get lost, but the knowledge is going to be even more valuable in the future. And it has to be in a different context. It can't be about IOs. It must be about something else. Okay, we have no idea what's coming out of the building. Why not? We can't get access, or we don't have the money to spend on the products to get it out. Okay, maybe open hardware, you can spend $200 instead of $5,000 per year. And I think that's what Brad is doing in Vancouver. They just take a Linux box, put Voltron on it, and then it's $200 and they can get data out. And that would have cost like $5,000 5 years ago. So I think that's, again, like shifting the best to more like the business level, understanding the drivers. I think that's definitely needed. Yeah, maybe that's a long spiel, but I mean, that's my, I really believe in that, not talking about technology too much. It's fun, I love it, but it's not really healthy in the long run, to be honest, so, yeah.
So what's the definition of open?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that most people in this room would care about interoperability.
Yeah.
So, for example, interoperability in terms of communications, and since we're all controls guys, obviously interoperability in terms of control. Can you see what this thing is doing? Can you edit what it's doing? Do you need special tools to get in there and edit what it's doing? So I think that's what's important to people in this room, and I don't know, you guys can confirm that for me.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things that came up in our earlier discussions too is, well, okay, why isn't BACnet enough? I mean, BACnet is open, allows you to see points and objects. What more do we need? Why do we have to go further than that?
I mean, one thing that's important is the control sequence.
So being able to see
being
the
able
logic
to see
and
what this DDC is doing and how it's doing it, and if there's something wrong, being able to edit that. I think that's very important.
and be able to edit it, you mean, without having to use specialized software that
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right. That would be great if some of the big people in the industry could come together and collaborate on an architecture that is the same for all of their DDC controllers. Such as Sedona. Sedona would actually is actually perfect for that. If everybody used the same application framework, then it would be possible to view not only the points, but the points in context, how they're wired together. And it's really not a new technology. It's just everybody agreeing to streamline it across product lines and vendors.
Yes, question.
Everybody's, from the manufacturers I've seen, their approach to BACnet has been quite different. Some will say, I've got a gateway, and you choose what you want to see. Others have a system where they basically just blast out everything, and you have to try to filter through it, which at least gives you everything. You just have to try to figure it out. And it's really been challenging because it depends on the vendor. Some of them, you just got all these points that say A, and you go through and you've got all these numbers that populate, and you need the decoder ring to figure out what those items meant. Right?
Yeah.
So BACnet, the idea of it, I think, was a really great idea, but I don't know if everybody approached the implementation of it the same way. I don't think everybody approached it saying, I want to join a group where I'm going to share how my stuff works to this level. And that's something that would have been nice if they'd have said, okay, let's make it so that we're open to this level, and programming and dedicated stuff is below that level because everybody wants to keep their own programming strategies. Some use line by line, some use block. I don't know how you would get an editor that would be able to interpret those different approaches, but to make it so at the very least it would bring you down to this level and you could see everything across the board from all the quote BACnet manufacturers would have been a much nicer thing to see.
So I mean, that brings up an interesting point: is how do you what's the incentive for these manufacturers to achieve a certain level of openness.
Nobody else takes your stuff out to basically upgrade a site.
Yeah.
You're still there. And you can still be called to do work on the buildings that you have on a campus. Because by being proprietary, you've basically said it's all or nothing with me, right? And so they go to a next building and they decide, you know what, we like these guys more, and they'll find the money to make your stuff just go away, and now you don't have any part of that market, and your foot's out the door, and you're gone.
Yeah, well, and I would say part of it's the education piece, because I mean, a lot of these systems get specified by mechanical engineers who have no understanding of the inner workings of BACnet. So they just say, well, this has got to be BACnet. And it's very easy for someone to have a very lax implementation of BACnet, and that meets the spec, so it goes in. So I think the education component to say okay, the people specifying the system have to know enough that you're specifying the right level of openness and transparency in implementation of BACnet. So it's over there.
Brad, I think your comment was along the lines of a question that I wanted to ask. So, the question is raised, what is the incentive for the manufacturers to move in a more open direction? Well, they're the demand side of the equation. So that incentive is going to have to come from the supply side of the equation. And in your role as a consulting engineer, that's appropriate. Yeah. You're close to that conversation. So maybe it's within your community that you guys have a lot of leverage there to lead the owners who are paying the check. The guys that own the buildings, they're the ones that are paying the check. And I think that's where the incentive has to come from.
Yeah, that's part of it. And I mean, I think this question was kind of got posed on. I was doing an interview with the Controltrends guys last week or something. How do you talk about open with your clients? And I mean, my answer to that was, well, I don't. You talk about BACnet, some things like that, but really, the discussion for me goes to, well, what do you want to do with this system? What's the value you want to get out of it? If you want to go in the direction of doing increased data analytics and things like that, okay, now you've got an argument for saying, this is a reason to do, maybe we want a haystack, we want to open the tagging protocol so that we can do that. Maybe we want to make sure we've got a really robust BACnet implementation so that we can support those kinds of services. But I find the discussion really needs to go to, okay, what's the value proposition, what's the driver behind it, rather than just open for open's sake. Although there certainly is the argument of longevity of the system and avoiding vendor tie-in and that sort of thing, which is an important part of the discussion as well. You guys,
one thing I'd like to add here is that I think that it's kind of better to think of this in layers. I think that once you kind of abstract the layers of like interoperability on communications, and we're a little far from interoperability and controls, but once you abstract these layers, then the incentives for manufacturers will be like services and customization of their products. So there's money to be made in that.
Yeah, and I mean the reason. So I mean to use one example. I mean we started using, I think as Nicholas mentioned, an open source product that or software is developed by the DOE for data acquisition, because we couldn't find a good solution on the marketplace that kind of met the cost point that we were looking for. And any solutions we did find disappeared 6 months later because the vendor decided to stop selling them. So it kind of left us hanging. So that drove us towards an open source solution that we could control. Didn't have to worry about going away. We could put it on a Raspberry Pi or a PC in a box and have control over that solution. So that was what we didn't start out saying we need to have an open source solution. We were kind of forced to the open source because it was the best thing to meet our needs at the time. So, and I think that's where a lot of it's going to come from. It's got to be driven by the demand side.
And you also customize it to fit your needs.
Yeah, that's right. And we can, once you have it's kind of like Linux. There's different flavors of Linux, and people sell Linux distributions, even though Linux is an open source platform. Well, you can have an open source base that you work from, and then build your own stuff and decide I'm going to contribute some of this back to the community, or I'm not. I'm going to keep this proprietary, and that because ultimately we still have to make money out of this. So.
Right.
Do you think that we could be in danger of pushing open too far? The reason I ask that is if we open up strategy to anyone, we ultimately, as contractors or specialists, take responsibility for what we put there. If that can't be tracked and monitored by way of us being vetted and trained correctly and really served at the coal face for a long time, are we open, I think, for data and to extract what systems are doing? I agree with you entirely. It should be open to anybody to be able to read what it's doing. But are we going to cause ourselves untold problems? And are manufacturers going to turn around and say, well, oh no, we can't be held responsible for that equipment anymore because the people that are actually playing around with it now are trained by us. They're not actually approved to do the work they've been doing. Is there a danger of that?
Yeah, I mean, if you get to the point where you can just script anything in Python
Yep.
on one of these, then anyone who's taking an intro to computer science or watch a YouTube video can start playing around with control. It's a good question. Do you guys any?
Yeah, maybe. Okay. Okay. Hi, hey Dave. Nice to see you. It's a good question, I think, but it's also might be a confined one to like how the world looks today, where the power is. Because you get something as a contractor and the other ones standing behind you, this is how you should do this. We own you, and if you do anything else, we're not going to support you, right? If you veer off the way. So I think like in today's situation where they have the channel system, distributor, dealers, vendors, all these kind of things, absolutely. I mean, but I think if you look, hopefully 10 years or 20 years or whatever we heard yesterday, when everyone here is dead, hopefully something has changed, right? So if you look at that perspective, I think it's a moot point. I think it's today, yes, but hopefully that's not the world that we want to have. And I think that's based on the definition of open. I mean, I think we discussed it in the session last week. I mean, if you go into a grocery store today, you have all this stuff that you can pick from, and you pick your own dish. And then you can start a restaurant, and then of course you're going to be held accountable of the dish that you're serving. You're not going to be complaining about the ones who provided the pepper back from whatever it is, right? But that's the situation right now. Now you go into a building automation grocery store, and you have 6 products to choose from, and you can only do 5 different dishes. And if you veer off that path to something else, of course, I mean, we're not going to be held responsible, says the one who's selling these dishes, because you didn't do what we said. But it's not going to be that way. It's going to be a grocery store that you go into today. You're going to be able to pick what kind of produce you want, and you see, okay, this customer wants salad for breakfast. Okay, you pick salad, and then you maybe add something else, and here's a fantastic dish. So that's the definition in my world of open, because you have the choice, not someone standing behind you, breathing down your neck and telling you what to do, and if you don't do it, yeah, we're not going to support you anymore.
Well, and this kind of sounds like, if you look back at what happened in the IT industry, I mean, that kind of sounds like IBM's argument from back in the 70s, right? Well, you can't just let anyone play with this.
That is going to make our industry more open. There are all too many control systems out in the market where you need source code, and the actual original file was created before you could do it. I think all systems need to be made so that the actual programs and the strategy are held on the controllers. So that if you're not happy with the contractor, if you're not happy with how it works, your choice is there. You are open to pick another one who can come in, look at what's been done and change it.
Yeah, so you
That to me is open.
Right, exactly.
like the more layered approach, right? I think that's what you discussed yesterday. So you bring it to another level. So you still sell the products, but you can still, someone else can write Python scripts on top of it, but it's still the same thing. Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, that's again, like maybe that defeats the purpose of what's going on in the industry today, because you want to get it proprietary. But
Brad,
Systems now.
another question back here. We really like to get music.
yeah, okay. Yeah, please.
Yeah. Okay, sorry.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, and this may end up being a question for Nicholas, but I'd like everybody's perspective. And the panel has brought up a couple of things about some competing ideologies that are out there. All of us in the field, sometimes we get so entrenched on what connects to this, who collects that data, whose point is that. But you mentioned Google and you mentioned AI. So the other ideology out there, when Google bought Nest, we thought, what are they doing? They have no clue what they're doing. What they bought was a market segment from people that didn't care if the fan was on high and the compressor was on low and the temperature and humidity were decoupled. They didn't care.
Yeah.
What they cared about, 2 people out of the house were 6 miles away, and all the reporting, all the data Google collected was irrelevant to us.
Yeah.
All right, so now we got 2 camps. You know, when you talk about data collection, and I think we're seeing IBM's cognitive building initiatives in Europe,
Yeah.
that's something that can impact us quickly. They're data collecting, and when you talk about buildings talking to the facility manager, that's where they're at, and that's where nobody else here is at. Does that make sense? So
Yeah, absolutely.
can you give us your insight as to what's happening with cognitive building and where that's going to go next?
Okay, yeah, it's a tall order, but I'll try. I mean, I think that's maybe some of you know Phil Cito from what's called Building Automation Monthly, right? I think he makes the distinction. In the US, it's more HVAC, traditional IOs, et cetera, and in Europe, it's more like the whole building. Cognitive buildings, building information modeling, digital twins, so to say. In Azure, I think a couple of months ago, they came out with this digital twin concept. So, yeah, I mean, if you look at it from a BACnet perspective, everything is going towards BACnet IP, then it's BACnet Web Service, and it's BACnet Secure Connect. So yes, it's more about collecting the data as fast as possible, as accurate as possible from buildings, and then connecting to a digital twin. I mean, we as a company, we're doing it today. We partner up with BIM companies, all of these kind of things, because it's so easy once you have that one API that sits on top of the building. It's a web service. It could be Haystack, BACnet. It doesn't really matter. If you got that source to what's going on in the building, and then, of course, Andy yesterday, president of BACnet, talked about this also IoT coming in. Because IoT is also, there's some idea about that you can just put IoT in buildings and just get the data out, but it has to be under a layer. It has to be standardized. And then again, like if you take that data, which what we do, and turn it into BACnet objects, then you get the building underneath BACnet, but everything else that you want on top to make it cognitive, you just do it. You just apply it to it, and that's what we're doing today. So I think like in terms of AI, machine learning, we're also having partners doing that, both in the cloud, because if you get access to the data and then you apply machine learning, then you make the building smarter. And it's not like buildings talk to people. It's just basically you can talk to it, but I mean, getting the data out, understanding your whole portfolio of buildings in a matter of that. So you just have to query the 300 buildings that you have or 500 buildings, and you get the answer back. Not 500 buildings, one each, but 500 buildings with one question. And that's what it's turning to, and that's what cognitive buildings mean. And I think it's technology-wise, it's doable today, pretty easily, to be honest. Especially actually in the US, because if you compare it to Sweden, okay, one more minute. If you compare it to Sweden, BACnet is non-existent. Everyone talks about Modbus and the bus level. BACnet doesn't really exist. No one uses it. So it's such a fragmented situation. So there it's like even harder to get data out. So, but yeah, everything is possible today. You just want to do it. And everywhere, there are companies that are doing it as well. So yeah, it's all there, the pieces.
I think what you're trying to do is admirable. I don't want to deter any of you. I kind of feel like the market has already spoken a bit. It's a very broad topic that you're talking about. I think the market has already kind of spoken a bit about the hardware. Yeah. And, you know, I've been around for a little while.
The U.S. market or global market? Or yeah.
I would be referencing the U.S. market.
Yeah.
And, you know, I was around when Modworks started to really get pushed pretty hard. And, you know, the customers typically weren't interested in putting multi-vendor platforms into their building, you know, because of the risk associated with that. And as an owner, I would say that, you know, we don't want that risk either. We've kind of standardized on a single system. Yeah. The system, if you look at it already, is kind of open. You have solutions like you're talking about where you can build something if you want to. Programmable integrated circuits have been available for a very long time. Yeah. And, you know, all the data, if it feeds back to a database, that's basically open. So if you want to do things in the background, analytics, intelligence in the background, it's available from the software, and that's how we do it. You know, we have a single platform because, you know, as an owner, we don't want to carry 50 different lines.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And, you know, because our maintenance staff, we have to stock all that. Yeah. You know, and it's not practical to do.
Yeah. No, I absolutely, I agree 100%. It's just the ability to do something. But again, like if you look at you create a dish for someone, it comes out as one thing, and that's I mean, the ability to select doesn't mean necessarily that you have 50 different apps. That's one of the challenges, right? So, it opens up for someone to do all of these things, but to package it in a much better way. That is not like really this what Dave mentioned, one standing behind it in that way, and it offers a lot of flexibility for the future. But I understand what you mean, and it's not going to be what Scott Cochran said. It's going to be a bumpy ride moving forwards. So absolutely.
There's a need for some of the hardware that you're talking about, but if you're going to take on some of the gorillas of the industry, I can tell you right now, you're not going to win against some of the big players.
We're going to win in the long perspective, definitely, 100%. I mean, look at any other industry; it's going to happen, but it's going to take some time.
I don't agree with you, because if you look at cars, for example, right? And Tesla's trying to break into that market. Look at the resistance that they're facing, trying to break into that market against the big guys. Right?
Yeah, of course.
They're also
It's difficult. Yeah, absolutely.
Tesla's the catalyst for change, and what the impact they've had on our industry is that they forced the other manufacturers to do something they weren't ready to do.
Their patents.
I agree with that. So I think if you said that to Google 15 years ago, you're never going to find the same Yahoo, or you're never going to do that. Then you've just made a jolly great big mistake.
Yeah, I mean, Nokia had their best year 2008, I think. Like 5 years later, it was one of the biggest company in the world. 2000, 8 years later, best year. 5 years later, non-existent. So of course, it can happen. I mean, this is a traditional industry, obviously, but I'm not saying it's going to happen tomorrow. Maybe in 20 years, or like yesterday, like in 50 years. But there's some change. It's not. It's going to be a different.
Maybe this is a good time to then, like, what are the drivers of change? Like, that change is going to happen unless there's a reason for it. I mean, there was a reason that Google became as big as they were. There was a reason that, IBM stopped being, an integrated provider, and they became a manufacturer of hardware instead of a mainframe company. Like, there were reasons behind this. So maybe just get you guys to briefly touch. What are the drivers for moving to open systems? Like, what's the background pushing? Why are you guys making open hardware?
I mean, one of the things I think is important is that the users has to demand it, because basically it gives power to the users. I mean, one really simple example is, what if you had two laptops from two different manufacturers, and for example, you couldn't get your PowerPoint from one laptop to the other, or you couldn't move your files or whatever. So that's one good thing that I think is a really basic example of why you would want this.
I think the answer is choice, isn't
it? Freedom of choice.
Yeah, freedom of choice, and it has to come from the users, or else it has to be standardized by an organization, which I think the user side thing is easier to
have to educate the users.
Exactly.
Well,
Right.
I've had personal experience. I've been doing this for a while too, but we're trying not to name anybody. 15 years ago, there was an upgrade from one of the major players. So I had a campus with 5 buildings that had the old stuff. The new buildings were going to be with the new stuff, and I had to pay $50,000 to put them all together. I didn't have a choice. So that's basically what happened. You need, people want choice. People don't want to be, it's like they go again and say, hey, you know what? I'm doing your building for free. There's a strategy behind it. They're going to get all the rest after that. So.
Yeah, that's a real great point. What should drive this is maintainability of a building. You install a section of ductwork, and you don't ever have to worry about that section of ductwork becoming obsolete or unsupported. It should be the same with controls, right? You install a controller, and of course, unfortunately, if it doesn't become obsolete, you're not going to rip it out and sell another one. But it's a very frustrating thing for building owners to have to take a field controller that takes proprietary, firmware and DDC architecture, and it's still working, but it's not supported, and have to remove that, and usually you have to remove all the network too, and just to take another controller and put it right in there. The controllers should, to the owners, it's really important to them that that it lasts as long as everything else in the building. You know, all the mechanical systems. I mean, the same thing like with chillers. You know, you can, just as long as it's the same type of system, you can buy a chiller from, you know, York or, you know, a Train, and you can put it right next to another chiller and not have to take the whole thing out and you know, replace them all because they're not compatible with each other. It's a big deal, you know, to the people who own these buildings. And you know, when I talk to a lot of these building owners, that's their major frustration is the fact that, you know, once I have a particular control system in my building, I'm like married to it, and the only option is to rip everything out. You know, it's really expensive. They really don't like it. You know, like it's a real sore spot. You know, and as a contractor, I mean, we kind of run with that, you know, like, oh, this is my site, but it's not. It belongs to the owner. You know, it's not any particular manufacturer site or any contractor site. The building belongs to the building owner.
I think it's failure to recognize that it's a disruptive technology that's emerging. You know, and I liken it to the film industry. You know, years ago, you had the major camera manufacturers and film producers out there saying, you know, they basically had a corner on a proprietary industry, if you will, in every form. You got the camera, you had to buy the film, blah, blah, blah. There was a few major players. It was basically a monopoly divided up between 3 or 4 main players. Yeah. And then when the digital camera came out, the advent of the digital camera, you had this backlash saying people will never get away from wanting to have a physical picture. But then the first time you pick up your digital camera, you can take 1,000 photos and you don't have to pay a single dime for it.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
yeah.
Someone's going to come up with this emergent technology. Yeah. It's truly open source, and if everybody else isn't on the bandwagon, there's going to be a humongous backlash because, unfortunately, the industry does not respect the owner.
Yeah, that's true. Exactly. I mean, my comment, I think, was what the driver was. I think your point is absolutely valid. Today, the drivers, they're not there, not 100%. I think we all know that there are some stuff, and a lot of people on the fences, even the global giants, Google, whatever, want to come in. And I think there's this sentiment of these tech companies learning BAS faster than us people or building automation specialists learn technology, right? But I think the driver has to be monetary. Of course, energy management or energy efficiency, saving the world stuff is fantastic. No one really cares. Otherwise, the world wouldn't have looked like it does today, right? So it has to be money. And the money transaction from owners comes from basically one thing. It's just buying something, then selling it at a premium, and maybe some refurbishment and doing something to optimize the value. But if you can come up with something and make the clear, no-brainer argument, okay, if you invest $1 in technology, maybe it doesn't have to be open, it can be something else, but and that will lead to $5 per square meter that you're going to make during the life cycle, not saving money, but actually making money by selling data or inviting others to innovate with your buildings because you offer a platform for free, like you said. That's one of the drivers going to have like the whole business rushing to this, and that's what's going to disrupt probably the dragons because they have a cost structure that doesn't fit that model. It doesn't really work, right? And if you also have like a no-brainer with invest in technology and they would also increase portfolio value by 5% or 10%, if you can make that distinction like super clear, like there is no doubt about that this is a fact. And we're going to be there, if not this year, within 5 years. And that's what's going to lead this to, okay, we're going to invest in smarter buildings, and that's what's going to be the driver. It's going to be money, obviously. So I disagree 100% with it's not going to happen. It's going to happen. It's just a question of how fast it's going to take.
I mean, just quickly to your point on disruptive technology, you know, with the open source data acquisition stuff that we've been using, I mean, someone asked me, well, you know, how many points does it support? And I kind of looked at it and said, well, you know, whatever the network can support. I mean, there's no point limit on it. It's a, you know, a cheap box running free software, but there's no point limit. It's kind of whatever the network will take, and that's your limitation. It's not kind of an artificial limitation on you can do so many points. Or so I think, you know, that's where you start to see the disruption come in, because I mean that directly challenges a lot of business models out there in the industry. Alper?
Yeah, I just wanted to give it as a note. There is actually an open source project called Project Senstar that merges Sedona with Haystack, which enables hardware agnostic PPC get his own big bucket, and then wants to play with it, they can play with it.
Yeah, one kind of interesting thing about Alper's project, his Sandstar application is a lot like, like getting Excel or Word on your computer. You can just download it and you can, install, uninstall. Somebody asked, what's your definition of open? To me, that's kind of like that. You buy a laptop, it comes with an operating system. You can switch to a different operating system. It's a laptop still made by a big company, Dell, Lenovo, but you have the ability to replace the operating system, and you have the ability to install and uninstall applications, whether it's DDC or some type of haystack server, or you have something like Sandstar where it's all combined into one single application, and you could actually just download it from the internet. You don't even actually have to get any tool. It's just the same way. Just that's what my definition of open is a PC with physical I/O attached to it. And a lot of the what would the industry be like? It would be just like the IT industry. You can get switches, you can get patch cables, you can get wireless access points, you get servers from different people, but you can put them all together and you have lots of choices of what operating system you're using and what kind of applications are running on it. That's what I see an open source building automation system looking like. Exactly like the exactly like IT industry, exactly like data centers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When I saw that the information, next generation HVAC.
Sorry, could you maybe come up to the mic just so?
Can't hear you.
Introduce yourself as well.
Let me see if I can work that out. There you go.
Hello, my name is Luis Piños. I'm a PE, electrical engineer. When I read that number, next generation HVAC controls open hardware and open software. Is that a statement or is that a question? If it is a question, yes, that's going to be. But as a statement, you need one piece in there, but it's not free. Very important. I sell as an engineer, my commodity is my time.
Yeah.
I sell my time. I cannot do that and sell my time and not charge it for anything. It's very important to realize that. Yeah. For example, we were looking for a solution. We need a powerful computer with open hardware, with open software. This is a very powerful computer. Actually, it's 1 billion times more powerful than the first IBM computer. That's what it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
That one, and that program that you see here runs a chiller plant of about 1,500 tons of air conditioning for a pharmaceutical company. It runs buildings with train systems for chillers. It runs a system with in Mexico for different locations. It runs at some schools in the school district in Miami. This one in here, this is not the display. This is the program that runs on top of the system. It's a BACnet server, BACnet client, has an API to the website, and you can take the API free to get all the information that you want. The next generation is applications that runs on top of open hardware, open software, but they are not free.
That's true.
Absolutely.
That's from my point of view.
I absolutely agree.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah,
It's as an enabler.
And if you want, let me know.
I'm a consulting engineer as well, and I mean we're using open source hardware and software, but I mean we're using that to do energy audits and recommissioning studies, and that end product is certainly not free to the owner, but they're tools that we can use to I think deliver a better service, and I think that's what the point is, because they're tools that we didn't have access to when we were dependent on proprietary solutions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interoperability was one of the buzzwords. What do you guys do today to make it a bit more perspective? Yeah. What do you do today to ensure that, for example, when Kelvin, finishes a job, Nicholas can pick it up and
that's a good question.
It doesn't belong after that with Kelvin.
Just quick, hopefully. I think there's interoperability when it comes to open hardware software, right? But I think the interoperability, I actually wrote this to the group late last night, was pretty drunk, so I was gonna take it up, so thanks for that. I think like the interoperability in the market as well. like the whole market, what's going to happen after the project is done, handovers, that kind of things. That's the challenge. I mean, that's super difficult. I mean, someone comes in, they do something, that doesn't matter if it's open hardware, open software, what happens afterwards? This digital twin concept, that's one of the biggest problems, because you don't have an idea what's going on in the building today. You create a digital twin, okay, now you don't have an idea what's going on in the building or in the digital twin, and it just like adds to the chaos. I think that's what you meant, but I mean, that's something that has to be interoperable, not from a technical, but organizational. We talked about semantic interoperability, but interoperable in the whole industry per se. And that's going to take a lot of time, absolutely. Because today, like the project structures, the handovers, where the material is, all this kind of stuff, it's tough. It's absolutely tough. So yeah, maybe you can answer from your perspective, Kel.
I have something to add here quickly. I think the one thing that's really helping accomplish this is APIs and containers for applications. Mm-hmm. So I walked around the show and I saw a lot of people starting integrating APIs. We are also integrating REST API in our products. Yeah. We have the BASPI that's completely open source hardware, and it's got open standard technologies in it, and also REST API. So I think that's one thing that's going to help accomplish that.
Same here.
Yeah, exactly what he just said. Standardization is what allows different contractors to work on other people's equipment, and that's if you look at the things that have been really successful. We started this by talking about Niagara and BACnet. They were standardized. That's why the BACnet was a couple of manufacturers getting together initially and saying, okay, we're going to start making products that you have the same networks and you have the same the same type of objects that are standardized. That was a winning idea. And also, there's a lot of Niagara everywhere, and that was kind of the thing too. Is we're going to not only standardize that, but we're going to standardize like a application framework, and multiple manufacturers are going to be allowed to run this software on their products. So you just keep on going in that direction. That's what we're looking for.
Yeah.
I'm a train controls engineer, so I don't take anything personally. I'm a guy. I had a buddy did an intern, said it was a cool boss. You got free lunches, so nothing personal. But I guess I would just share kind of quickly, I guess, some of my viewpoint, because I've only worked for Train. I guess on our side is one, I think this is awesome, all this conversation, dialogue. Train, I know our factory engineers that develop our products. I think they like this stuff. I think they like to hear it. But one important thing I think and at least I'm not speaking for the company, but just my opinion, Train's not paying our factory engineers to develop BACnet. It sort of come and Ashray said, hey, this is something we need to do. They met in Nashville and they built BACnet and missed some things at first, and Train and Johnson were like, okay, we'll do this thing y'all are telling us to do. Engineers jump in with this, like, okay, missed it. Maybe we spoke a little too fast with our BACnet and Johnson too slow, and we adjusted and kind of growing and growing. So I guess that's kind of one point I wanted to say for Train is and for any of those is we're down to try and do this stuff, and we're listening and we're trying to do this stuff. Definitely not perfect at it, but I like this stuff. It's good stuff. I think Train and Johnson, we've all made, Siemens, Honeywell, I think we've all made improvements over the last 20 years. The second thing too, that was interesting on the data point mapping, or your point mapping or how you pull it in. I've done some integrations. I've seen them come in. Bucket of points is what we call it. It's really difficult. I've also seen it come in. It's a beautiful bow-tied bundle. And it's this is amazing. This is going to take me 6 hours. And you got a whole new, you just went from company A to Train or whatever. And I know people do the same, Train to company. I get it. I get it. Yeah. But I just want to say about that, there's a realistic part of that I just wanted to mention, and that's in new construction world, Georgia World Congress Center, for instance, getting built, and Train wins a bid. We got Train controls or something, and this is theoretical. there's mechanical contractors, there's owners, there's general contractors, hustle, hustle, hustle. We all know controls guys are the last guys on the job a lot of times. Hey, why is that controls guy still sitting on his bucket down in the mechanical room? And it's like, hey, he's trying to, he's trying to beautifully name all of his points so that if 10 years from now, it's like, hey, so if 10 years from now, somebody hates you at Train, your points will be beautifully mapped. It's like, it's just not really realistic. So what we did is we tried to start going to our factory and saying, hey, we need to have pre-programmed solutions where, our points are automatically mapped, as best we can. And so there's stuff like that that's moving. And I guess I just wanted to throw those 2 points out there. Nothing personal, but
no, that's
sorry, that was a little soapbox. I apologize.
That's a great point. like the one reason to do this also would be to make people not hate controls contractors, because other trades despise us, because we're the people who are keeping the building from being completed, right? We're the last person there, and it's all our fault.
All right, well, we're pretty much at time, and just before we go, I just want to quickly give a plug for what's coming up next, a half an hour from now. We've got the 7th annual Connected Community Collaboratory, and you probably recognize a few of the faces up there, but in my experience of going to a few of these now, you'll never see a more experienced, wise group of industry titans in one place than right here in a half an hour. So, and I suspect there'll be continuing a discussion that is in part covering some of the same territory, but I'm sure venturing into new areas as well. So, yeah, please come back for that, and thanks for coming.